All right, we're down to the bare bones here. You can see I've had to mount my camera in a strange position. Let's get into our discussion now. In the last video, on this Sunday, I'm just checking, it's still Sunday, the 7th day of September from Chico, California. And I just announced that I am now the official teacher of Islam. Obviously, an exaggeration. Islam doesn't really have more than one teacher. Islam has only one teacher. But you know, in the transmission from generation to generation, your teacher dies. And so you have to have replacements. And this is not to invent anything new. It's simply to carry on the teacher's teaching. They only have one teacher. We the Islam people, of whom now I am the teacher. So I just contradicted myself. I can't possibly be the teacher, certainly not with a definite article, the teacher. That would put me in the direct lineage of the Prophet. May peace be upon him forever, as it certainly will be, because God promised that. So whenever you say, peace be on the Prophet, you're merely confirming God's will. Now, what about myself? I don't have the Prophet handy. In fact, my society blocked me from ever knowing that there was such a person. I didn't know about his book, the Quran. I didn't know about the Islam culture, except apparently they tried to invade Europe. And that's about all I knew for decades. Well, now I know everything there is to know about Islam because, for the simple reason, and this is subjective, I hope you realize I'm speaking from my heart. I've always been Islam. But am I the Islam teacher? In one respect, yes, because I'm carrying on the transmission. Now, the transmission we've defined, but let's just make sure, if you're tuning in for the first time, be aware that I try to keep my videos self-contained so I don't throw in something that you don't know what went before. But you can tell we are in a series, and I just announced myself in the last video as the teacher of Islam for a very specific reason. And I am serious, but that does need to be disambiguated rather rapidly, I should have to say, because Islam doesn't really have a teacher. I can't be what cannot exist in a communication channel. A communication channel is not one-sided. So when I endeavor to state that I'm opening up a channel, that's all I'm doing is opening it up. It doesn't mean it will ever exist. And that's the nature of communication sometimes. Well, you have to print your thesis, you have to print out your book, you have to print out your theory or your discovery, you have to reach out. That's the very core nature of science, is communication. Now, in the case of true science, as I have defined it so carefully, true science it has only one goal. You could put it that way, truth. And that's not limited to mathematical truth. It's whatever truth is. And we know now, and we always have known, but we're now able to prove there are two kinds of truth. One of the contributions I was able to make to that sequence is those are the only two forms of truth. So it's very important to define the two forms of truth. So we've already done so, and one of them is strictly rational, logical, in a provable approach. So for that you need binary logic, and that's strict science. That's what's called rational logic. You do need measurements in order to confirm from the universe that what you say about the universe can be proved, preferably with a mathematical equation, but also geometry, which covers structure, covers the other side of rational logic. There is structure, and there are measurements that we can make to support whatever structure we're attempting to establish, which is called geometry. That's how you understand things. No man has ever understood anything with numbers. Mathematics does not accomplish any goal except in its strict use. It's very restrictive. But the other form of truth is what dominates humans. It defines us. We really don't use rational logic for our life. Rational logic is a tool that we've learned how to use. But the forms of rational logic which have been discovered, propositional logic using truth functionality, you can really gain a lot from the universe that you could not have gained if you hadn't used mathematical tools. So it's indispensable in that sense, that is numbers. But we don't actually solve our problems with numbers. That is human problems, because our entire existence is divorced from any concept of quantity. The problems that we face in defining reality and dealing with consciousness, which are our main concerns by default, we're born with these problems, and we have to solve them. That's the approach I take. Truth is to solve those problems. You need to know the truth of your environment, or you'll never know who you are, what you're doing, where you came from, where you're going. You'll never know anything about what's going on around you. You'll simply exist and die. And most men, you could classify that way, I suppose, but that's philosophy. We don't really want to delve into philosophy. But we are talking about life and death. As a human, we all die, so that's an ineluctable fact that must be taken into consideration right away and solved, absolutely solved, what is death. Well, we don't want to do that here because we've adopted a scientific approach, and death has nothing to do with science. Nothing whatsoever to do with science. Neither does life, except as a mechanism. Science does not deal with human questions. That's how I treat science. And then I was able to prove that science must deal with human equations because that's the definition of science. That whatever science is, it has to be to the solution of the human equation, or it's not science. Now there's technology, so there's an exception. It's a huge exception, because most people identify science with technology. I'm sure that I do to this day because I was brainwashed to think of science as technology for fairly obvious reasons. Technology dominates the globe now. And that's not science, though. It's technology. Is technology a classifiable realm of science? It certainly is, because that's how you deduce truth. It's a certain form of truth. It's measurable truth. You have to be able to prove what you say in strict science. In human science, the only science that matters is human science. And we use strict science in order to validate the questions that we do need answered. And we don't give a fuck about the universe. The universe has nothing to do with the human equation, except it obviously does. So we have a complete split in perspective. Either you include humans and everything about humans and talk about humanity, which comes down to you. You're the only thing that matters in a certain approach to truth, because you're the only one who will ever know whatever truth there is. No one else will know truth except you, because you're the one who needs to solve your problem, and you need truth to do that. So it's all about you. Well, there's 8 billion of us, and if you count those who are already dead, there are about 16 billion humans, each of whom was the center of their universe. And you have to ask, is that an illusion? And from one aspect, the strict mechanical aspect, I think you'd have to say it's debatable. Are we simply an illusion? Well, I don't like that word because it is an ill-formed statement. It's an ill-formed theory because you're not putting it into rational form. If you say that your life is a projection or an illusion or a cybernetic other reality and you're not in it, that doesn't make any sense because it can't be tested. So the concept of illusion is illusory. It's a self-contradiction. There is no such thing as illusion in the universe. Now, you could think of exceptions, of course, but they're in very limited context. The foreground, background, you can have a sort of a Rorschach test and fool people left and right with what they think they see, but it's not really there. So there is such a thing as illusion in a very restricted context. But consciousness is not an illusion. Consciousness is simply something very difficult to define. So getting back to our original question, where do humans originate? This has split humanity down the middle now. Science is split down the middle. Religion is split down the middle. Everything is up for grabs. Nothing is certain now because of quantum mechanics and infinite cosmology. The cosmology of infinity going out. That has discovered a different universe. A universe we simply cannot understand. It's not possible to understand it. Well, you see, we have trouble with saying things like that in science. Because we have to understand it. Because that's part of reality. If you're going to understand reality, you're going to have to address reality as it is. Well, that's consciousness. And that's a whole point of view. Is you, or myself, or Euclid, or Adam, the very first human male, or Isha, the very first human female. Well, now I think you understand. I just raised a rather delicate question, didn't I? There are two narratives for the origin of humans, and only two. There have never been more than one choice or another. And the speciation is one of the choices, that humans speciated. Under a blanketing philosophy, a scientific philosophy, you could say, of uniformitarianism, uniformitarian geology, and therefore uniformitarian biology. And what that means is, as much time as you need to devise a ridiculous theory. If you only have thousands of years, you have to go with a biblical narrative of the origin of man, Adam. But that contradicts speciation. You can't have both. So it's one or the other. Well, how do you decide that? It's the most important question of all. As I have phrased it correctly for the first time in human history, the actual question that we're asking is a conjugal question. And one side of the conjugation requires that we know where humans are from. Exactly. Where, when, and how. How did the human race come into existence? Well, it was in time. So how long ago were the first two humans? There are two contradictory answers. Now, as of a century and a half ago in England, a man named Wallace, Alfred Russel Wallace, very quickly followed by Charles Darwin, announced their extension of uniformitarian geological principles, which were suddenly, as of the 19th century, thanks to Charles Lyell. He introduced the concept of millions of years. Millions of years. Millions. Let's be more specific. Yes, it is millions. How many millions of years do we have to go back to find the first two humans? The first female and the first male. You have to find them both. And of course, they were in the same place at the same time because they conjugated physically, and those were the first two humans. There weren't any humans before those first two. There just weren't. No matter how you slice and dice it, there had to be two original humans. And that's well known now from the discovery of the locked DNA code for semiotic transmission of physical characteristics of an individual race, or if it's in the animal or plant kingdom, it's called a species. But for humans, there's no speciation. So that's very critical. So why hasn't science fully conceded that? That's a dangerous question. Because now we're actually pointing the finger, j'accuse, that your scientists are mistaken. There is no such thing as human speciation. But then the question remains, what about the animals and plants? Did they speciate? No one has ever answered that question. Darwin said they must have speciated, and I realized that 50 years ago, that Darwin was right about the plants and animals. The problem is we discovered in the 1980s, you could put it back to the 1970s, it was a progressive discovery of how DNA works. Well, it works on conjugation. It's quite obvious it's a conjugal. It's actually two perpendicular helical strands. They're actually orthogonal. And they wind around each other. They recombine, and that's the beginning of another generation. In the case of man, in the race of man, because man is not a species. That's been proved. So speciation has two levels, one of which has been disproved. What about the plants and animals, though? Darwin certainly made a very good case that they must have speciated. The problem is, and he admitted this, there's no mechanism. And he could not imagine a mechanism. And he said in his book that it's the most absurd idea to even consider some mechanism. There cannot be a mechanism. And he was right. There's no mechanism that explains speciation. Now, in the transmission record, from the beginning of written, really transmissible information of humans, does go back, according to its own narrative, to the very first human, Adam. Well, the very first male. We isolate the male because it represents both, but you shouldn't do that. The female is equally important, and the existence of the male-female split already proves that speciation is not a physical process. That code cannot be changed, and so the speciation process would have to make a distinction with speciating the male and speciating the female. That cannot be done. So speciation itself is non-physical, but it looks like it happened. It's undeniable that it did happen. We just don't know how. I know how. That's the most important discovery in the history of science. The way I'm defining science, to answer the question that science wants to answer. On behalf of somebody who wants an answer to something. We do want an answer to something. We must know where we're from. We must know that, and no in between. We're either descended by speciation from the ecology, which is extended Darwinism, sometimes called neo-Darwinism, although that has several wishy-washy definitions. Darwinism is simply speciation, but you can't say simply, because humans don't speciate. And we don't speciate in either direction. The human race was not formed by speciation. That's known now. And so that's a problem. And so we have to revert to the record, the written record, and see if we miss something. Is the written record true? Was Adam the first male? Was Isha the first female? Is that true? Yes. And it's the most absolutely proved fact that humans have ever had. Why? Because it goes back to the beginning of humans. That the first human was told how he was created. Adam was told how he came into existence. So that's the answer. It has to be the answer. Because there's no other logical explanation. The very first human said, wrote down, not actual writing though, it was actually his great-great-great-great-great-grandson, Enoch, who invented writing. I learned that from the Islam culture. They know all about Enoch. What they don't know is what's in the book of Enoch, because nobody knew that at the time of the prophet, which was about 600 AD. He lived into the 700s, the early part of the 700s, but that was the beginning of Islam. At that time, the book of Hanoch was only known to a rather lonely Semitic tribe. These were actual Jews living in Ethiopia who kept the book of Hanoch as part of their religion. And that went unnoticed. For 17 centuries, Europeans were unaware. And so was Islam. Islam rose, and the golden age of Islam was about 1000 AD. Well, it was still 7 centuries away from recovery of the book of Hanoch, the book of Enoch. And the Islam people say, and know they're correct, that man is a prophet. He was quoted by Yeshua. So he's one of the transmitters. And he was the great-great-great-great-grandson of Adam. And he invented writing. And he transmitted his prophecy. And then it was lost. It was actually suppressed. Because it dealt in subjects that I'll just say, the Israelis did not like. Because it indicted them. And the original transmission of the only religion known to man consists of approximately 3 critical pieces of information. One of those pieces of information is the prediction of the flood by Enoch. And he died before the flood, but he predicted the flood. And this is in the book of Enoch, that Enoch predicted the flood. Well, now you have to question the transmission, because that could have been invented later. It wasn't. How can we prove that it wasn't invented? You'd have to have another piece of information that not even the flood could validate, but would eventually come true. And that is the prophecy of the elect one. That's the most important piece of information ever divulged to Islam in this modern age. So I am the teacher of Islam, and I just taught Islam something that every Islam man must know now. You must know my proof for speciation, because I know the mechanism. Darwin did not. Stephen Jay Gould did not. None of the modern atheists know. They can't figure it out. There's no mechanism. Yes, there is. It's angelic agency. It says so in the transmission. And that's the clincher. That means that the prediction of the elect one is according to that transmission. That means the Jews are satanic. And it means that the Islam people are correct. And so when I say I'm the teacher of Islam, I'm teaching all Christians. And if you're not Islam, you're not Christian. And there's no such thing as a Jew. They're out. And their red heifer and their rebuilding of the temple is satanic. That's the false Messiah. The Jews are expecting that one. We're not. Because the Messiah cannot be political. Yeshua proved that. he was not political. Is he then the Messiah? Yes. Adam said so. Noah said so. Ibrahim said so. The prophet said so. Yeshua announced himself as not your leader to the Israeli remnant, which is the Jews. And then he announced their destruction, which came within 40 years from the Titus attack on Jerusalem, which destroyed that temple forever. And that temple will never be rebuilt. That's part of the transmission. Yeshua confirmed it. The prophet confirmed Yeshua. That's why you can trust the prophet. Muhammad, peace be upon him forever. It will be upon him forever. He was predicted also. I just learned that. I doubt it not. I believe that he is the prophesied last prophet. He proved it, and he cannot be disproved. He is the last prophet. And so he confirmed Yeshua. He confirmed the original transmission. That's the elect one. That's not the false Messiah. The Jews say that that is a false Messiah. So the Jews are damned. And that's who's attacking Iran. That's who's attacking Islam, is the damned. And now you have the solution to your political problem. You now know who the enemy is. He can't be stopped. He's already won. The question is, do you personally want amnesty from the winning army? Because this earth is about to be invaded. And if you're not on the side of the invader, you're going to be chopped. I hope that doesn't offend anybody. I'm a scientist, and I live in America. I have a guaranteed constitutional right to freedom of speech. There is no hatred to be found anywhere in what I say. There is a political entity that is fulfilling prophecy. There is another entity that will fulfill prophecy. So there is a war going on, and you're the victim, and you will be chopped. You have to plead to the invading commander to spare your life. That's Islam. That is Islam. It's falling down on your fucking face before the invasion. Evil must be destroyed. The prophet said it will be destroyed. Yeshua said it must and will be destroyed. Physically destroyed. So that the correct solution for this earth can be achieved by the only one who can do it. That is the elect one. He's coming back, but not to be murdered. If he came back the way he came the first time, the Jews would kill him again because he's not political. Well, this time he will be. He'll be anti-political. So I'm confirming the Islam transmission, the only source of religion and your only source of your only way out. You will convert, or you will go to eternal punishment. That is not my decision. That has been known since the first two humans, and the transmission is guaranteed correct. So if you believe in speciation, you'd better understand my solution for speciation. The angels did it. It's in the book of Noah, embedded in the book of Hanok. And I discovered that. So that makes me the teacher of the earth right now. Thank you for tuning in.